Hello and Assalamu alaikum. According to the World Economic Forum, Saudi Arabia ranks 131 out of 146 countries on gender equality. Similarly, according to Human Rights Watch, Saudi women experience discrimination in relation to marriage, family, and divorce. Despite the reforms, and the Saudi government continues to target and repress women's rights activists and movements. To talk about these numbers and claims, I have with me Sabeeha Rehman. Sabeeha is an author. She writes for mainstream newspapers like Wall Street Journal, and she is a speaker based in the United States. Welcome, Sabeeha.
Welcome. Thank you. Thank you for welcoming me and having me on your show.
Thank you. So, Sabeeha, you recently wrote a very interesting book. It's Not What You Think, an American Woman in Saudi Arabia. So you spent 6 years in Saudi Arabia, you were working there. So, my first question is why would an American woman go to Saudi Arabia?
That's a very good question, Farah. Meaning me and my husband and our children, we had a very settled life in the United States. He as a physician and me as a hospital executive. Uh, excuse me. And there was really no plan or no reason for us to just pick up and leave. But one day, my husband, while going through one of his medical journals, just looked up to me and said, there is a hospital in Saudi Arabia that is looking for an oncologist. And my response was, so? I think I'm going to apply, he said. And I wondered, why? Why would you want to go to Saudi Arabia? So what had happened is that my husband, who is a practicing physician, was beginning to feel that the practice of medicine in the United States had lost its luster. It is not what it used to be. It was overregulated. Paraprofessionals were second guessing his medical decisions, and he felt that he needed a change. And he had started looking around for other opportunities. We explored other opportunities, and when this came by, he said, "Why don't I just take a look at it?" And I said, "Sure, take a look at it." I was sure that he'll make up his mind and come back with the decision that it's not for us. So he writes to them, and they write back and say, "Why don't you come for a locum? Come for a month, and we'll see if we like you or if you like us." So he goes for a month, and I figured he'll go and he'll see that this is not for us. He calls me back in about a week and says that they would like you to come and they're willing to offer you a job. So I said, you know what, let me go. And once I'm on the ground, I'll have the evidence that this place is not going to work out, and that'll be the end of it. So I took a week off from work, went over there, and by the time my 1 week over there was over, I was totally sold that this is definitely worth a try. The place was very welcoming. This was in Riyadh. The hospital had been established by the American corporation. It was tailored to along American systems. It was approved by the Joint Commission on Accreditation of Hospitals. And the staff over there, the administrative staff, the senior management was all American. So I just felt extremely comfortable from a professional perspective in that environment, and was ready to give it a try. And I figured, they're offering him a 2-year contract. Consider it an adventure, and let's go for it. We ended up staying for 6 years.
So, you like the overall professional environment there and you decided to be there. How about your preconceptions or pre-notions of Saudi culture, and particularly an American woman going there? So how was that? How was it challenged or confirmed by the Saudi traditions and culture?
So going in there for my 1 week visit, I was of the opinion that I always like to be in the driver's seat, literally and figuratively. And why would I want to live in a place where I don't have mobility? So when I raised this question with the American women who were working over there in senior positions, they said, Sabeeha, wouldn't you prefer to be driven around rather than having to drive and then park and fill gas in your car, pump it? I said, you have a point. They said, the hospital has a limo service. You just have to make one call. They're at your doorstep, within 10 minutes, and they drive you and pick you up, and it's a luxury. And that made sense. And that turned out to be very true. There were so many other instances. Like when I went over there for that 1 week, I saw that the women in the workplace did not have to wear the black cloak, the abaya. They were dressed as professionals. They didn't even have to cover their hair. This was a professional environment which was very international. And therefore, whereas there was a dress code, which was just about, like full leaves, length sleeve clothes and no skirts, something I can easily live with and am used to. So those superficial um, kind of restrictions didn't seem restrictive anymore going into that environment. And then there was much more, which we can get into.
Right. So um, this is very interesting and intriguing at the same time, that those superficial
Mhm.
restrictions, why would why would you call them superficial? Because for many feminists and for many human rights activists, these are the questions of women agency and independence. So how why would you frame that like that?
Because on the surface, it appears that if a woman is to dress up from head to toe in a black cloak before she steps out, the whole idea feels oppressive. But if you can get past the notion that this is a requirement, I have to wear the black cloak, the abaya, when I step out in public, just get past that notion that this is mandated, I actually found it quite liberating. I no longer had to worry about what am I going to wear. I could be in my sweats, and all I had to do was just throw my abaya, my cloak over me, and step out, and I could go to the mall, I could go shopping, I could go visiting. I didn't have to worry about it. Bad hair day, no problem. Just wrap a scarf around your head, and you're all set to go. And that is why that whole notion felt very superficial. I welcomed having to wear the abaya because of the freedom. I found it gave me freedom. I was no longer, compelled by, you know, all other considerations.
So that is again very intriguing for me, that abaya as something liberating first. For women, countries like Saudi Arabia and Pakistan, abaya is imposed. And abaya overall, don't you think, is a symbol of patriarchy in the larger context? It is not a symbol of giving women freedom of their choices about clothes and all that. So I'm just intrigued, and I want you to speak more to the idea of abaya as liberating.
So you are right. It is imposed, and it is imposed from a patriarchal the values of patriarchy. Absolutely, the men are here to protect the woman. She'll be protected if she's totally covered. So that is absolutely correct. However, from a personal, individual perspective, it did not bother me. It just didn't. I did not feel oppressed. I was like ready to just wrap it around and go out, and that's what everybody was doing. But not because that's what everybody was doing, but because it didn't feel oppressive. Even though it was mandated, it didn't feel that way. And that's an important distinction.
Right, but you mentioned in your book, you have, at like your in your understanding, you had problems with veil because it hides your identity. I would like you to speak to that distinction, that you did
Yeah.
not probably have an issue with abaya, but you certainly have some issues of identity and hiding identity with veil.
Yeah. So that exactly is my issue with the veil. I respect people's need to, wear it if they so choose. However, it does provide anonymity, and it conceals your identity. And as a consequence, you cannot be held accountable for your actions or for your deeds. You can get away with anything. And as an example, there was an incident, and I do mention it in the book, in the nursing quarter, the nurses' quarter, female quarter, of the in the complex of the hospital. Men were not allowed to enter that particular building. And one morning, a woman in Abaya was seen leaving the complex, and the guard noticed that the shoes looked very, very male shoes. And when he stopped this person, it turned out that this was a man in an abaya wearing the veil. So that's just one example of the ability to conceal one's identity and misuse it. The other issue that I have is that it gives women an unfair advantage. So the women can see everybody, men, women, anybody they want to, but the men cannot see them. And I used to be, walking around the grounds with women in the who wore the veil, and they would be pointing out people to me, saying, "This is Mr. So and so, and this is Mr. So and so," and they knew everybody by face and could recognize them, and yet they were anonymous. And I think that's not fair. If we want to push for equality, then let's address it at all levels. So that is my issue with the veil. And besides, it's prohibited for Hajj. And during Hajj, this was very interesting because the women, Saudi women, and women from other parts of the world who have always wore the veil were very uncomfortable, removing it. And they kept putting their hands against their face because they just felt exposed and they were not used to it.
But Sabeeha, there are men who are obsessed with whale. There are men in Pakistan and beyond, even in Saudi Arabia and elsewhere. They are obsessed with whale. Why is it like this is not by choice that women? Maybe some of them want to, but not like there are women who don't want to wear a veil. But it is the patriarchal imposition on that. Why are men? If it gives a woman an advantage, then why are men so obsessed with veil?
So I'll answer that question in two parts based on my understanding. Uh, those men who support or advocate for the veil they actually believe that it protects the women, because if nobody can see their faces, then nobody will try to either flirt with them or sexually harass them. And by covering their faces, they are offering themselves that level of protection. On the other hand, I have experienced in the company of veiled women fighting for their right to veil themselves. We were in a class when I was going to perform Hajj, so women were attending a class that was giving us instructions on, the rules of Hajj. And when the teacher said that you will have to remove your veil because that is not allowed, they started protesting, and they said, "This is haram. You can't tell us to not to conceal our faces, and we cannot do this because men will look at us, and then men will know what we look like, and it's not fair for you, and it's not appropriate, and it's not proper, and it's not halal for us to reveal our faces." And they got so vocal that the teacher had to back off. And then she said, there is a way around, there is a workaround. Maybe you can, consider putting a device on your nose that protrudes, and then you can veil yourselves, and as long as the veil doesn't touch your face, then you can veil yourselves, which to me seemed a little, it didn't make sense. Sorry to say that. Uh, and the women then nodded in acquiescence. And I then remembered that when I go to Mecca to perform Umrah, I have often seen the female guards with those particular devices on their faces, and I used to wonder about it. So that's something that they consider to be as a workaround for women who would not want to reveal their faces. But these women, they were not oppressed. They were fighting for their right to veil themselves, and they prevailed. So that's very interesting.
But
We think
yeah,
that, give them the opportunity to unveil and they'll be the first one to remove it. No.
but did you also see some women in Saudi Arabia who were questioning this very gendered idea of Islamic piety?
Saudi people do not like to talk about religion and politics or anything personal. So I never had the opportunity to discuss this with Saudi women. They uh, they were very friendly and very polite in a professional environment. We worked very well together. But you step out of the professional environment, and that is the end of your relationship. There is no socializing, and there is no hanging out together. There is no visitation in the homes. I was never invited. If I invited, my invitations were turned down. So I never experienced this conversation, and it's one of my regrets.
You also mention in the book that the Saudis don't like to criticize the royal family, and now you also pointed out
Mhm.
you were not able to have those kind of conversation. Was it their choice, or is it because of the system that they are always under this constant fear, having a sense of surveillance all the time, that they prefer not to talk about all these issues? So, what is your sense, your understanding of these things?
My understanding is that it is not out of fear, it is how they have been indoctrinated, it is how they've lived. It is their tradition, it is their lifestyle, it is their attitude, it is their values, and that has become so much a part of their attitude and their thinking that don't if they don't speak about it, it is not because they're afraid. It's because that's just the way it is.
Right. So let's move forward to some interesting parts of your book. You also talk about the cultural shock, military versus regular time. What is that? I'm very curious
Okay.
about that.
Yeah. So, we think that when you are going to Saudi Arabia, the culture shock is going to be that you'll be very restricted. Okay. So I was able to, I've spoken to you about that, but some things about the culture shock was just the systems over there. So, for example, they have the metric system, whereas over here in the United States, we have the British system. And so if I went to the supermarket and I said, I'd like a pound of turkey breast, they would say, how many kilos, ma'am? And now I'm sitting and trying to convert that. Is it 2.2 kilos to a pound or 2.2 pounds to a kilo? And I come home with twice as much turkey as I needed. Then the
I
other
experienced the same thing in the US because in Pakistan we have kilos in
That's
the
right.
US.
That's right.
Yeah.
So, and if I am cooking and I want to, use my recipes that I brought with me from the United States, I was always trying to do the conversions so that when I baked a carrot cake, it came out rock solid and floating in oil. And then there was the Fahrenheit versus the centigrade. So that 40 degrees over here will mean that you bundle up and stay inside. And in Saudi Arabia, it means you unbundle and you stay inside. So, and then it was the order of the dates. So over here, like in Pakistan, we used to have date, month, year. Over here, in United States, it is month, month, date, date, year, year, right? And then you go to Saudi Arabia, and then it is date, date, month, month, year, year. And my problem was that each time I would schedule an appointment, for example, I scheduled an appointment for July 6th, and the gentleman showed up a month early. It was like 7/6 or 6/7. And then they have the military time, which is 1400 hours, 1500 hours, which I always had trouble getting used to. They would say, see you in 1400 hours, and I'm doing my math. Okay, yeah, 2 p.m. Then there was the Gregorian calendar versus the Hijra calendar. In Saudi Arabia, the calendar is in Hijra dates. So 2001 here was 1422 over there. And to make it work for the expatriates, that's what we were called, then they had a calendar with both dates on it, with the Hijra dates very prominent, but with the Gregorian dates just written in small font within the same cell. So let's take it as an example. I was getting on a plane to go to New York from Riyadh. And I went to get my tickets, and he told me, all right, this is the date on which you will be leaving and arriving, and at this time. And now I'm trying to figure out, how do I do all these conversions? I am in military time using date, month, whereas they are in Gregorian time, in regular time, and using a different way of writing the dates, totally opposite. And I am flying in military time hours. They are receiving me in the regular time hours. So, and I am not on daylight saving times, but they are on daylight saving times. Plus, it is a 14-hour flight, and there are time zone changes. So, how do I tell them as to when I'm arriving? And what happened with us once is that we were flying to Malaysia, and when we landed there and got to the hotel, the management said to us that your booking is for tomorrow. I said, no, I have it right here. My booking is for Thursday. And he said, it's for Friday. And he said, ma'am, today is Thursday. So.
Right. It was a lot. So speaking about the cultural shock and new things, you also talk about, which is something very interesting, two-door policies in Saudi families. What is that?
Yeah. So the houses have two entrances, one for men and one for women. And the men will enter from one door and settle into the men's living room, and the women from the other door into the women's living room. And in between is the dining room. There's only one dining room. So how do you manage the separation of the two? They have sliding doors. So you will close the sliding doors of the men's area, open the sliding doors of the women's area. They come get their food. You close the sliding doors, then you open the sliding doors of the men's area, and then they come and get their food, and then you close it again. And you have to be communicating to your husband, okay, now you open the door and I'm closing the door so that I don't get seen by the men and the men don't get seen by the women. Actually, it's the other way around. But and so that was how it worked. And they make it work.
This is more interesting. And how was the family system otherwise? Did you also meet people from the rural parts, or your focus was, or you were confined to the urban areas? So is there any parallels would you like to talk about?
This is so interesting. We would take trips into areas outside the cities, into the desert, into places like Abaya in the mountains. And it was, here in the United States, you have urban versus rural, whereas the rural is conservative and the urban is liberal. In Saudi Arabia, it's the opposite. So you have the city culture and you have the desert culture. In the city, the women were not allowed to drive. In the desert, women were driving SUVs. In the city, the women had to wear the abaya. In the deserts or in the mountains, the women were not wearing the abaya. In the cities, women were restricted at that time. They were restricted from working in public places. You didn't find female cashiers, you didn't find female bank clerks or tellers. In the desert and in the mountain areas like Abha, women owned and operated businesses were flourishing in the most choicest areas, like the touristy areas. All the souks over there, the shops over there were run by women. And they had Saudi men reporting to them. And, this Saudi woman is bossing them around and saying, Yalla, go get the woman her hat. And they're going running to get me my hat. It was fascinating to see and experience that.
But why this difference? How to make sense of it? I'm just thinking about this.
Yeah. So, Riyadh is, at least at that time, it was the most conservative city in Saudi Arabia. Jeddah, on the other hand, was liberal compared to Riyadh. And that was because the royal family was in Riyadh, and that is where the ulama and the religious authorities also had their base. So that was a reason why Riyadh was so conservative. And the more you move out into the outlying areas like the deserts and like the mountain areas, you don't have those guardrails. People have to survive, and they make do.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So now coming to the world-changing incident that changed the entire world, 9/11.
Yeah.
And you, an American woman, you were there at that time. So what was the experience? What was the initial reaction of Saudis, and how did they talk about it? Because you told me they generally don't talk about political things. So what was going on there?
It was totally different than what is perceived in the United States then and to this day. Um, the Saudis were so concerned about us expats being away from home at a time like this, particularly American expats. Their homeland had been attacked. They wanted to make sure that we were taken care of, our psychological needs, our professional needs. They were particularly attentive towards us. My boss called me in the very next day and said, "Are you okay? Is your family okay? Do you need to take some time to go back home? You are a new employee. You haven't earned your vacation, but go if you need to go." And they issued a memorandum saying that all expats are welcome to go home for an extended period with pay, even if they have not banked their vacation time. You need to go. You can just pick up and leave, no problem at all. If you want to cancel your contract, there will be no penalty. We have appointed psychologists who are available. If at any time you need counseling, please access these people. These are their names, these are their phone numbers. I did need counseling, and I did go and spend some time getting counseling from one of the psychologists. They bent over backwards to take care of who they called were their guests. And I did not hear anything that suggested that they were rejoicing or that they were happy about it or that they celebrated it, contrary to the perception over here in the United States. We had very restricted internet hours in the workplace at that time. We could only use the internet for our personal business an hour before working hours and 1 hour during lunch break. As soon as 9/11 happened, they made it open at all times. No guardrails, no restrictions, no limitations. They knew that we needed to be in touch and we needed to be connected. So they were very, very caring about us. But what also struck me was the public position that they took. So this was just in the environment where I worked. On the television, public statements were being made to the effect that we are sorry about what the United States of America is going through right now, and also that Osama bin Laden was an enemy of the royal family. He was committed to displacing them, to having them removed from power, and he could have, if gotten anyone from any part of the world in his network to have carried out these attacks. But he deliberately chose Saudi people to carry out these attacks because he wanted to put a Saudi face to this so that he could weaken the relationship between Saudi Arabia and America, and in doing so, weaken the royal family and hopefully, from his perspective, displace them. This was the public statement that was put out.
Interesting. But when you moved to the US after this, in US there was also a reaction against Saudi Arabia. I would say the public reaction. Then how did you deal with that? What were some of the misconceptions about Saudis or Arabs in general at that time?
Well, you know what? That wasn't the only time I was dealing with it, because as soon as I got to Saudi Arabia, on the suggestion of a friend of mine in my book club, she suggested that the minute you land, start writing to us. Tell us about your first impressions. We want to discover Saudi Arabia with you because your first impressions will not last. And we want to take this journey with you in real time. So share with us your feelings, your reactions, your confusion, things that make you happy. And I started doing that. Every evening, I would sit and write an email, day 1, day 2, day 3. And that's actually the first section of my book. And in doing so, I was already communicating with them how, how, how I saw Saudi Arabia, how it affected me, what was it about Saudi Arabia that was so appealing, what were things about it that confused me. I had already started doing that. And so that when I would come home to visit, and I would come twice a year, my friends would come rushing over to my place because they wanted more. They wanted to know more, and they would, despite what had happened. Now, beyond that, beyond my network, once this book was published, I did get pushback from several readers who said that they didn't buy it. They didn't buy the case that I had made that was pro-Saudi but in relation to 9/11. Everything else, no problem. But in relation to 9/11, they said no. It did not appeal to their sensibilities.
By the way, I'm not surprised if even they said this, because in the US there is a particular segment that holds the Arabs, the Muslim, in a specific way. So it's not surprising. Anyhow, so let's move forward to the other major event they organize every year, Hajj.
Mm-hmm.
What happens when Hajj is around the corner?
Oh, this is amazing. What is fascinating is how the country prepares for it. And if I was to say, if you were to ask me, what is it that the Saudis do best, I would say it is the preparation for Hajj. I have devoted a whole chapter in my book to how the government prepares for Hajj. From security to food to hygiene, healthcare, processing of the visas, housing, transportation. It is so involved. I mean, you have more than 2 million people coming over there, and all these issues that I just raised have to be addressed. People need to be moved, and Hajj is all about moving from one place to the other. You have to deal with traffic jams. You have to make sure if someone falls sick that there is medical care immediately available. You have to make sure that there is security so that if there is a conflict, people are kept safe. You have to make sure that the place is clean so that there are no infection control issues. And it is meticulously planned. Every day in the newspaper, the local news, English newspaper called Arab News, there would be an update on called the Hajj. I think it was called the Hajj update or something to that effect of what is happening today. Today, 100,000 pilgrims arrived in Jeddah from countries that I even didn't even know that people came from, and where are they moving to? Where are they being taken to? Today, so many security cameras have been installed at a particular place. Today, X number of Boy Scouts have been moved to watch out and help people who are lost. It was so involved and so meticulous. And the preparation and execution for Hajj is actually a case study in continuous quality improvement, because every year it gets better and better. They learn from their mistakes. We all make mistakes, and next year they've overcome it. It's pretty amazing. And when you think of how many people are there, accidents happen. Of course they happen. It's what is surprising is that more accidents don't happen. More people don't get sick. More people don't get lost because they have an infrastructure in place that addresses that.
Fascinating.
It
So,
is.
how do Saudi, like I'm talking about the public, how do they, how in what ways they react to the people coming to their countries? I am asking this question because I have heard people saying that they are not well treated when they are working in Saudi Arabia, or there are some stories about not being uh, well treated or questioning their human dignity, I would say. So how do they react to so many people coming to their country?
Are you talking about Hajj or are you talking about in general?
I'm talking about Hajj in general, in both ways. Like, what is the reaction if non-Arabs are coming to their countries?
Okay. So outside of Hajj, you have two parallel uh, cultures. One are the professionals, and my only experience is limited to the hospital where I worked. And over there, in that environment, we are were very highly regarded, treated with utmost respect, and our professional work ethic and our skills were uh, paramount. They loved Americans because they valued our work ethic and they valued the contribution that we made in the workplace. And if I was sitting in a meeting and I said, well, let's do it this way because this is how we do it in the States, they would be saying, oh, so this is how you do it in the States. All right, let's consider it, because the United States was the gold standard and Americans were the gold standard, Americans and Canadians. So that was my experience in the workplace. Now, once you step out of that environment and you go into the labor market, where you have masons and construction workers and the cooks and the drivers and people of the blue collar working class, it is a different story. And the things that you mentioned you hear happen, they happen a lot. And uh, what triggers that is that the employer is your guardian of sorts, that who controls your passport. He is in charge of your employment, and he is in charge of your ability, your mobility. So you can't move around, from one city to another without his permission. You cannot leave the country without his permission. I say his because at that time these were all male employers, and it gives them a certain degree of control over their employees. And in many cases, there is abuse. People are not paid on time. Their paychecks are withheld, and the working conditions are not optimal. So there is that circumstance that is very prevalent. Was when I was there, and migrants of that socioeconomic class were not treated as one would expect, or as they should be treated.
Right. So you talked about the hospital where you used to work. I guess King Fahd died in the same hospital, and you were there at that time. What were
Yeah.
that like when it happened?
Yeah, that was quite an experience. So I'm sitting in my office with my boss, and we are going over our usual. We had standing 8 a.m. meetings in the morning to just go over what's done, what's not done, what needs to be done. When the director of nursing, a Canadian woman, and one of the senior executives, a Saudi man, walked in, and he said something to my boss in Arabic, and my boss stood up. And then he looked at me and he said, "The king has died." The king had been in the hospital for a long time now, and it was not looking good, but nobody talked about it. We were not supposed to talk about it. This was to be, if we knew what his problem was, we were not supposed to say anything. We were bound by the rules of privacy, just like we are here in the United States. So my boss quickly picked up his pager and left to go to the floor, the royal unit where the king had been hospitalized. And I didn't know what to say or what to do. I didn't know if I should say, "I'm so sorry for your loss," or "I'm so sorry," because I had not heard people in Saudi Arabia speak that way when somebody died. Uh, So I just sat there not knowing what to do next. And the nurse came and sat next to me and said, "What do I do? What do I say?" I said, "I have no idea what to say or what to do." So then I asked this other gentleman who was there, I said, "What happens now?" He said, "Well, the royal family's protocol office, that's what it was called, they are going to take over. They are going to handle all the communications. They will handle the transport of the body, and they will handle all the processes and protocols and policies involved. And it's out of our hands." I said, "Do I say anything?" And he said, "No. We have to wait for the announcement of the king's death to come through official channels." Okay, understood. So I go to my office, and I'm sitting at my desk, and I get a call. And it's one of my colleagues, and she says to me, "Sabeeha, I hear the king has died." And I said, "I cannot say a thing." I said, "Okay." Then another call comes in. "Sabeeha, has the king died? We just heard the news." I said, "I cannot say a thing." Then my husband called me, and he said, "So I hear that the king has passed away." I said, "I'm not saying a thing." He said, "Well, you can now because it's on CNN." It was like, we have this gag order, sealed, don't say a thing, and now the whole world is talking about it. But I understand, we are in a certain position of responsibility, and even if the whole world talks about it, we will speak when we are supposed to. So anyhow, uh, I went down to the morgue because I was just curious. I wanted to see how all this is handled, and there was a guard outside the morgue, standing there, and he had this look on his face that said, "Don't even think about it." And of course, I wasn't thinking about it. I just wanted to see, like, what happens. So someone told me that they're bringing the king's body outside, and it's ready to be taken to wherever it has to go. So I went rushing outside. I said, this is history, and I have to be witness to it. So I went rushing outside. I stood on the lawn, and I didn't see a hearse. There was no limo out there. And then I saw an ambulance pull away. And that's when I realized that the king's body had been put in an ambulance and taken away. No fanfare, no pomp and circumstance, nothing ritualistic, just a very low key, simple affair. It was taken to the mosque. After that, he was taken for a burial, and the shifting sands claimed his body, and there were no markers put over there, no tombstone, no nothing. There was no mourning. There was no day of mourning. Pakistan, I think, had six. Arab countries had 6 days of mourning. Pakistan had 3 days of mourning, but in Saudi Arabia there was no day of mourning. So contrary to Queen Elizabeth's funeral, with all the pageantry associated with it, this was such a simple affair, and somehow it felt appropriate.
Interesting. Now, coming from this entire thing to the recent changes in Saudi Arabia, there have been some improvement, I would say, some efforts to make some improvements on women rights and all that. So how do you see that comparison to your experience at that time?
Oh, it's a remarkable change. Uh, Women, and I've been in touch with my former colleagues there. I have a Saudi friend here. Uh, it is remarkable, and how quickly it all happened. The most notable being that women can now drive. They have wheels, you know, and they have they are now able to vote. They are now in able to work in the public sphere. You land at Jeddah airport if you're going for Umrah or Hajj, and the staff processing the pilgrims over there are women. You walk into a bank and they are tellers. You walk into a supermarket and they are cashiers. Uh, they are very visible now in the public place. The abaya is no longer a requirement. The veil is no longer a requirement. In fact, my Saudi friends tells me that in Riyadh there are some restaurants which have a big poster of a woman on the wall with a veil and an X mark across it, which means no veils inside over here, which is I think is you know pretty drastic for those who still want to wear the veil. But nevertheless, just an example of how that restriction has now been lifted. They were part of the Summer Olympics. There is a Saudi female minister that was appointed in 2009. The chair of the Saudi Stock Exchange was a woman appointed in 2017. They are now in the military. They now have the first female deputy secretary general of the Saudi cabinet. So it is noteworthy to see. And guardianship, yeah, that was the most important thing. Women's mobility was restricted. They could not travel without their guardian's permission, and guardian in this case meant a male family member, either a father or your husband or your brother or your adult son. Now they can travel, they can check into a hotel, they can live alone. They still, from the last I heard, they still needed their male guardians' permission to marry. But other than that, all the other guardianship restrictions, I understand, are still in place. But there's a huge but here. Okay, so the restrictions have been lifted. An ordinance has been passed. It has been made legal. However, patriarchy and tribalism is very much a part of the culture. And those women who are driving are doing so with the explicit approval, permission, or support of their male guardians. Women still wear the abaya, even though they're not supposed to. But if you walk through the malls of Riyadh, you will see women in jeans and in tight shirts, blouses, but most of the women are wearing the abaya. So that a lot has to do with the culture and tradition, which cannot be dispensed with by edict. And when I ask people that how do the Saudis feel about these restrictions being lifted, the answer is it depends on who you ask. If you want to talk about general freedom, they say that there are some who applaud it but those who are against it say that it corrupts society. On driving, there are many who support it, but then there are those who are against it believe that it puts women in harm's way. And there are women who will make that claim and refuse to drive. Making the workplace accessible to women, those who support it say it gives them financial independence, but others who oppose it say that it impedes their chances of finding a husband and their children get neglected. So many people are happy with it, but then there are many who say that the pendulum has swung too far.
But this is very interesting, and you shared a lot of insights. However, do you agree? Because Saudi government recently sent a woman to prison for her expression on social media. So the women rights activists are still are arrested or sent to prisons. So all this that the women in Saudi Arabia have achieved is because of their struggle, because of their resistance against patriarchy. Do you think so? Do you agree with this argument?
I would say that I don't. And let me qualify it by saying that I always believed, living in Saudi Arabia, that when change comes to Saudi Arabia, uh, it will be the women that bring the change because they are go-getters, they are active, they are energetic, uh, they know how to fight for their rights. But at the same time, their the Saudi government is very much has given no freedom of expression. Okay, so you cannot carry out protests, you cannot speak out against the Saudi royal family, you cannot congregate in public places, you cannot express your point of view that is contrary to that of the royal family, otherwise you will end up in jail. And therefore, as a consequence, the rules that have been relaxed because that is what the Saudi royal family decided was necessary if the country was to move into the 21st century and if their economic viability was to be preserved.
So my last question is, if I ask you, what are some of the things that you still have with you that you got from Saudi Arabia, and you really care about those things? If you would like to share something with us.
Yeah. Uh, the people. I valued and cherished the friendships that I developed with the Saudis in Riyadh. I valued my colleagues' commitment to the workplace. Um, Contrary to public perception, that they are lazy. No, they're not. I have worked with them, and they were professional to the upteenth degree, and I truly appreciated that. What I also appreciated was their family values. It's a very family oriented society, and in public places, family considerations were always a priority. You walk into McDonald's and there is a playground for the children over there. You walk into the zoo, it's all family oriented, children coming first. And to the extent that if someone gets sick, they are their family members are given paid leave so that they can take care of them. They will pay for their transportation out of town to a specialty hospital. They will pay for their expenses. Very, very much upholding of family values. What I also brought back with me was that sense of peace. Living in Saudi Arabia, I was totally relaxed. I had very little anxiety. I never felt rushed. I was a very hardworking. I've always been a hardworking person, but in a very different way. There was something about the climate, the atmosphere there, that felt peaceful. And at one time, I remember asking an expat friend of mine, an American woman, white American, Christian, I said, "What is it about this place that feels so peaceful?" And she said, "It is the positive energy emanating out of Mecca." And she was a Christian. And she was right. At least that's what I believe, that that positive energy of thousands of people, devoted, in Mecca does transmit itself out and touch us all. It's a very peaceful place.
Thank you so much, Sabeeha, for this wonderful, insightful discussion. And let's see how our viewers react to the discussion, your observations, comments, arguments. So, yeah, thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me.